Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are cracking open one of the most unique economic reports out there, the Federal Reserve's Beige Book.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. It comes out 8 times a year, and it's not your typical data dump. It's really qualitative. It's built from interviews, stories, reports from businesses, community groups, experts all across the 12 Fed district.
And that qualitative side is exactly why we're diving in. It's supposed to capture the change in conditions, right?
Yeah.
What people are actually feeling on the ground.
Exactly. It aims to characterize that change since the last report. It tells us what businesses are really thinking, what their immediate worries are, and sometimes you see trends pop up here before they hit the official stats. It's like a real-time temperature check of Main Street.
So our mission today is to pull out the national vibe, sure, but also maybe the more interesting stuff, the regional differences from this October 2025 report. We want to find out, where things are flat, where they're softening, and maybe where there's still some surprising growth.
Well, the big picture, nationally speaking, economic activity changed very little on balance, basically treading water.
Okay, changed little sounds a bit
Uh,
dull, but usually that kind of overall stability hides some real tension underneath, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. That stability masks a pretty clear split across the country. You had only 3 districts reporting slight or modest growth. Then 5 saw basically no change at all. But 4 actually noted a slight softening.
And what's the main worry driving things?
Uncertainty. Elevated uncertainty was cited again and again. Uncertainty about policy, global stuff, it's weighing on activity.
And I saw a specific warning in there, too, about politics.
Yes, definitely. Multiple reports mentioned the downside risk if there was a prolonged government shutdown. It shows that what happens in Washington really does create economic anxiety out there.
Okay, let's unpack this. Maybe start with prices. That always hits home. If the economy's sort of sluggish, why does the report say prices rose further?
Yeah, and input costs even picked up pace. Things like rising import costs, insurance, healthcare, even tech solutions. It's broad-based.
What's driving that input cost pressure?
Well, what's really striking is how often tariffs came up. Across many districts, this seems to be a core driver setting up this real tug-of-war.
A tug of war, how so?
Well, firms are struggling with how to respond.
Hmm.
On one side, you've got companies absorbing these higher costs. They're keeping selling prices flat
Why would they do that? Squeezing their own margins.
to keep market share, basically.
Yeah.
And because customers are pushing back hard against price hikes, New York mentioned a pharmaceutical company doing exactly that, just eating the tariff costs.
But not everyone can afford that, right?
No, definitely not. Especially in manufacturing and retail. Lots of firms are just passing the cost straight through.
Any specific examples jump out?
Yeah, there was a specialty appliance maker in New York hiking prices for the second time this year, specifically citing tariffs. And it gets maybe even more concerning. Contacts in Atlanta were essentially saying the full impact of tariff pass-through, quote, has just begun. They expect increases well into 2026.
So this isn't just a temporary thing, it's baking in.
It looks that way. It suggests that the sort of structural inflation from trade policy is far from over.
And there was something about inventory levels, too.
Right. Philadelphia and Richmond noted this problem where firms are running low on their pre-tariff stock, the stuff they bought before the costs went up. Once that cheaper inventory is gone, they have no choice but to raise prices on goods made with the newer, more expensive inputs. That's a pretty clear signal for future price hikes.
Okay, so mostly upward pressure. But were there any exceptions? Any prices coming down?
Yeah, a few important ones that show how localized things are. Where demand had softened enough, prices did fall for some specific materials. Steel prices were down in the Atlanta district, and lumber prices fell in the San Francisco district. So it's not uniform pressure everywhere, but the general trend for finished goods and services is stubbornly up.
Okay, so businesses are juggling these costs. Ultimately, that pain lands on the consumer, right? Let's pivot there. What's the story with consumer spending?
The story is, it's really 2 different economies playing out at the same time. The overall picture is a slowdown. Consumer spending, especially on retail goods, just sort of inched down.
Any color on that slowdown?
Atlanta had that perfect little detail. Diners apparently starting to skip desserts or alcoholic drinks. I mean, that's classic belt-tightening, isn't it? Cutting back at the margins.
Yeah, that paints a picture. But you said 2 economies. What's the split?
Well, this is maybe the biggest takeaway from the whole report, this bifurcation in the consumer market.
Okay.
So on one side, you have higher income folks, Their spending is strong. The report notes this nationally and specifically in places like Boston, New York, Philly, St. Louis. They're still spending comfortably on things like luxury travel, nice hotels, resilience at the top.
And the other side,
Uh,
lower and middle income households.
They're doing more than just skipping dessert. They are actively hunting for discounts, looking for promotions, really trying to stretch dollars.
How bad is it for the middle?
It seems pretty tough. St. Louis Contacts actually used the phrase middle-class recession to describe it.
Wow, a middle-class recession.
Yeah. And their point was that these middle-income consumers aren't just tightening belts, they're using credit, like credit cards, just to maintain their current spending levels. Not to buy more, but just to keep up.
And you can see the downstream effects of that stress.
Oh, definitely. It shows up in the community-level reports. Boston, St. Louis, Dallas all reported more anxiety among low and moderate income households, and the evidence is stark. More people using food pantries, more trouble paying bills. Dallas specifically mentioned rising evictions.
Growth.
And St. Louis added another layer, growing use of those buy now, pay later services, and crucially, higher credit card delinquency rates. That points to real fragility.
And speaking of budget pressures, there was that absolutely stunning detail about childcare costs from the Kansas City district.
Oh, yeah. That one really jumps out. You should hear this. The annual cost of care for an infant or toddler in Nebraska is reportedly greater than the cost of in-state tuition at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
Wait, say that again? More than college tuition?
More than in-state college tuition.
For shells.
Childcare, it just puts the whole cost of living crisis, especially for working parents, into such sharp, painful focus.
It's unbelievable. Okay, so consumers are squeezed, businesses face high costs. How's the job market holding up amidst all this?
Well, the headline is stability. Employment levels were mostly stable. But again, that stability hides some important structural changes happening underneath.
Like what kind of changes?
We're seeing layoffs and attrition reported across different districts. The reasons cited, weaker demand, yes, but also that persistent theme, elevated uncertainty. Businesses are hesitant.
And I noticed some specific drivers of structural change mentioned, like AI. That's not just theory anymore.
No, it's definitely showing up now. This report makes it clear AI is having a real-time impact on jobs. You had employers in Kansas City and San Francisco specifically noting layoffs linked to adopting and implementing new AI capabilities. It's reducing their overall need for labor in certain areas.
And not just in tech hubs.
Right. Atlanta firms said they expect more cuts based on what they're seeing from early generative AI results. And there was that quote from a Minnesota advertising firm, expecting AI tools will mean a, quote, smaller need for entry-level folks. That could really reshape hiring pipelines.
So AI is reducing demand in some white-collar areas. What about other labor pressures?
At the same time, you've got significant labor supply constraints popping up because of recent shifts in immigration policies and enforcement. This is hitting sectors like hospitality, agriculture, construction, manufacturing pretty hard. It was mentioned in New York, Philly, Atlanta, St. Louis, San Francisco, a lot of districts.
And what's the concrete effect of that strain? Does it just mean jobs go unfilled?
It's more than that. St. Louis Contacts spelled it out. Labor shortages, specifically because workers are afraid of deportation, are actually driving up labor costs in those sectors. And it's causing delays, especially on construction projects, so it's another kind of supply shock. But on the labor side, adding to wage pressures in specific areas.
Speaking of wages, what was the overall trend? Modest growth?
Generally modest to moderate growth, yes. But there was a specific cost pressure making things feel tighter for employers, even if base salaries weren't soaring.
Which was?
Those outsized increases in employer-sponsored health insurance expenses, that's a big chunk of labor costs that's rising fast.
And are hiring practices changing too?
Yes, there's a noticeable shift. Employers seem increasingly inclined to hire temporary or part-time workers instead of committing to full-time positions. Minneapolis Contacts gave a specific example. Workers seeing their hours cut back, maybe from 20, 30 hours a week last year down to just 15 or 18 hours now.
So less stability for workers, even if they technically still have a job. Okay, let's zoom in on specific industries. Where are these fractures showing up most clearly? Agriculture sounded particularly stressed.
Yeah, agriculture conditions were described as deteriorating. Terms like strained, deteriorated, poor crop conditions came up, especially in the St. Louis district, and it's tangled up with global trade problems. Minneapolis and Atlanta both noted China cutting back soybean purchases, turning more to Brazil. That hits U.S. farmer income hard.
How bad could it get?
It sounds potentially dire in some places. Contacts in Arkansas estimated that maybe up to a third of farmers there might go bankrupt or just leave the industry altogether.
Wow, a third. That's a huge impact. Okay, contrast that with real estate.
Yeah.
Always a key sector. What's the picture there?
Deeply mixed. The residential side is definitely struggling. Sales were weak in many districts like Atlanta and San Francisco. Home builders are resorting to pretty significant incentives. Dallas mentioned discounting, obviously, but also things like mortgage rate buydowns.
Can you just quickly explain what a mortgage rate buydown is? Why use that?
Sure. It's basically where the builder pays a lump sum to the lender upfront, and that money is used to temporarily lower the buyer's interest rate for the first few years of the mortgage. They're doing it because high interest rates are just crushing affordability. So instead of slashing the house price, they make the initial monthly payments easier to handle. It shows how tough the market is.
Definitely sounds like a sign of stress in housing. But commercial real estate wasn't all bad.
No, not at all. There were pockets of real strength, showing where the modern economy is still investing. We saw strong demand for data centers. Chicago, Minneapolis, San Francisco all mentioned that. Also medical offices in Richmond. And retail space demand was actually reported as strong in Atlanta and St. Louis. Cleveland even saw an uptick in commercial activity, apparently helped by a dip in interest rates.
Interesting mix. What about manufacturing? Nationally challenging, but how are firms coping?
Adaptation seems to be the key word. They are definitely adjusting. We saw examples like a fuse box maker in Richmond changing its product somehow to cut costs. Or, going further, an apparel firm in St. Louis actually offshoring its manufacturing to the Caribbean explicitly because of labor challenges here.
But then didn't we also see movement in the other direction, back towards the U.S.?
Exactly. Which brings us back to tariffs. Philadelphia reported firms doing what they call tariff-related onshoring.
Meaning bringing production back because of tariffs.
Precisely. The idea is that tariffs have made global supply chains so costly and, maybe more importantly, so unpredictable that for some, the old cost advantage of making things overseas is eroding. Might as well make it closer to home. Other firms, like in Kansas City, were focusing on just trying to grab more domestic market share, so lots of different strategies.
Adaptable chaos, indeed. Okay, last piece. The financial sector. Loans, credit quality.
Overall, loan demand was pretty muted. Again, uncertainty is the main reason cited. Businesses are hesitant to borrow and invest. However, there were exceptions. Bankers in Cleveland and Dallas actually saw loan demand increase a bit.
Why there?
They thought maybe it was due to slightly lower interest rates at the time, and also some clients getting a clearer picture of how tariffs would finally impact them, allowing them to plan. But beneath that, there's a warning sign. Consumer loan portfolios are deteriorating moderately in districts like Kansas City and St. Louis. That middle-class recession showing up in credit quality again.
Right. This has been really illuminating. So if we try to wrap this all up, the big picture is an economy kind of holding steady nationally, but it feels brittle.
Yeah, brittle's a good word, and incredibly bifurcated. You've got the high-end consumer doing fine, while the middle class is really straining, relying on credit.
And those input costs, tariffs, insurance, they seem really suck, really entrenched.
Deeply entrenched. And the labor market isn't just tight or loose, it's undergoing these fundamental shifts. Immigration policy changes, the emergence of AI, it's reshaping things.
That sums up the contradictions pretty well, but the Beige Book often leaves you with something to chew on, right? A hint about the future.
It does. And this time, it came particularly from the Kansas City district. Despite all the current slowdowns and softness they reported, many contacts there were actually expressing, well, optimism for next year, for 2026. They expect their sales and their employment levels to be broadly higher in 2026 than they are now in 2025.
Okay, that sounds positive. Growth expectations picking up.
It does sound positive. But here's the kicker. Those same contacts in Kansas City are also expecting the pace of price growth in 2026 to be slightly faster than it was this year.
Ah, so growth comes back, but inflation picks up again too.
That seems to be their expectation. And it leaves us, and you listening, with a really crucial question to think about. Can the economy actually get that growth momentum back next year without reigniting serious inflation?
That's a tightrope walk.
Exactly. That's the needle the Fed and the whole economy is going to have to thread heading into 2026.